It's close to impossible to separate something from its context. Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon both benefits greatly from this and is also a victim of it. Despite this being the 6th numbered entry in the Armored Core franchise, and technically the 16th game of it, and the fact that it predates the Soulsborne Sekiro Rings games, I don't think it's a stretch to say that most people that have discovered this game or are interested in it have put it on their radar because it's by From Software, the guys who made the Soulsborne Sekiro Ring. And that makes a lot of sense because those games are some of people's absolute favorites, and they are in their own right incredibly transformative. As such, comparisons with those other games were inevitable. Previews and pre-release media made it abundantly clear that this was not a Souls-like, and that you shouldn't expect it to be. I kept remembering this as I played through Armored Core 6 a total of 3 times to see all 3 of the endings, with each of my playthroughs continuing to offer new missions, new content, new weapons. For as much as this game is very different from those other From Software games, it still has a lot in common. Many of my favorite things on offer in games like Bloodborne and Elden Ring, which are 2 games that I easily place in my top 5 games of all time, were present here and felt just as engaging as in those games. There is an undeniable talent to the team that made Armored Core 6. It strikes a very delicate balance between many disparate things with a skill that we don't often see. And that extends to its retro sensibilities as well. It doesn't abandon the core of what identifies the series, pun intended, throughout much of its other older iterations, but it modernizes the game in a way that, while not necessary, it still benefits greatly from. At the end of the day, Armored Core 6 is a game that is an absolute joy to play. If we distill AC6 down to its fundamental parts, it's an action RPG. You have a flexible system that allows you to craft your own build, a term often used in RPGs that fits perfectly with these massive hunks of metal that you pilot. If you want to be a heavy artillery tank or a blazing fast melee ninja, the system will allow for it, and everything in between. Once you set your mind to the build, you then have to pilot that mech in small, highly focused action levels that are very similar to something like a Dark Souls boss run. You have to understand the moves available to your mech, its stamina recovery, reload times, the range of its attacks, all to make it through. These levels will often end with a boss battle that requires you to understand the enemy, memorize its attack patterns, and sometimes completely change your build to counter them in the case that it proves too difficult. And all of this planning and understanding of enemies, the levels, and the route you take through it really made me feel at home with From Software's other games, but with some key differences. As much as there's a lot of flexibility in what you can build, there is way less potential variance than in something like Elden Ring. There are no levels and stats that you can grind or highly obscure gear to find that could break the fight. The progression feels much more like that which you would find in the earlier portions of those games, when options are still limited and accounted for, and especially those before Elden Ring. More directly, this could compare to something like Sekiro. To me, there is a spectrum in action games that is measured by reactivity and flexibility. Character action games like Devil May Cry offer a fair amount of flexibility within the tools that they offer you and require a high level of reactivity and technical execution. Others, like Elden Ring, offer an enormous range of flexibility, but depend more on your ability for memorization on highly predictable events rather than reacting to them. And the technical execution of it is all much lower, often limited to positioning and dodging or blocking, and then very simple inputs for attacks. Armored Core, while more busier to control than some of those other From Software games, definitely falls into that category. It lowers the difficulty barrier of things like Sekiro, but follows its template. It takes away the exploration and concentrates on highly replayable bite-sized chunks and adds in more flexibility. And as much as I understand why comparing Armored Core 6 to the Souls-like saga has been avoided, I think it holds a lot of its DNA and enough to entice fans of those games. When it comes to the way that users have reacted to Armored Core 6, there have been 2 very important camps. The first type of review is one that I've seen the most. die-hard Armored Core fans saying that the game simplifies, strips out, or soulsifies a lot of what Armored Core has always been. I can't speak to this, as the last time I played an Armored Core game was probably in the late 2000s, and the specifics are all hazy. I would take these into account, however, if you are one of these people that really misses those old games. The second one levels criticism at bosses, either for their difficulty or for how they force you to change your build in a game designed for you to explore and build your own mech. Strange as it may sound, I understand this complaint. Some bosses are just very difficult without the right build, and others are a cakewalk with almost any build. But I'll get into this later. Just know that this criticism is more of a fact. You either like that or not. I personally like it, but it does become tedious on subsequent playthroughs to remember that you have to change out your build for those specific fights and for nothing else. But like I said, more on this later. The game is not difficult, except in a few moments that I still consider much easier than some other famous pain points in other games. They are still well below Father Gascoigne or Margit, and not even close to Millennia. The interesting thing is, it could be way more difficult if you choose to ignore what the game recommends. Balteus, the Chapter 1 boss, which is now obtaining infamy, is only difficult if you don't take advantage of his shields by using pulse guns. Once you do, it becomes a joke. As a very minor spoiler, you can fight Balteus again later, but stronger. I decided as a self-imposed challenge to not use pulse weapons, and after 30 tries, I switched to pulse weapons and took him down immediately. In a different game, I would have left to explore, find new gear, gain some levels, upgrade my weapon, and returned with a higher chance of success. Armored Core 6 doesn't allow for this, and I'm sure this has led many people to criticize it. But it does offer you the ability to buy new parts tailored for the fight ahead, and if you don't have enough credits to do so, you can replay missions for money or sell your existing parts. I find the idea of criticizing Armored Core because it isn't a Souls game to be an invalid one. Sure, in those games, that is how it works. You get to do those things, you get to leave and grind up, obtain different gear, and with your new statistics, beat the boss. This game has that retro feel, and it's a very standard thing. It's a level-based progression. It just has a lot of that flexibility, and like I said, despite not having those elements, it does feel very Souls-like. It even lets you switch out your parts at its plentiful checkpoints if you're defeated, as long as you already own the parts. And by the end of my first playthrough, I had enough money to buy the whole shop out, just in case I ran into a situation where I wanted to equip something after failing, but didn't feel like restarting the mission to access the shop. Not because that would be a large hassle or too much time. These levels are bite-sized, but because I had so many credits that there was no reason not to do so. The gameplay loop here is indeed very, very different from what you might expect from something such as Elden Ring. It's not even the same stratosphere to compare leaving a dungeon to explore an open world and fall into hours upon hours of different adventures than to grind an identical mission that you already played to go replay the mission that you're stuck on with no real difference in knowledge and ability. Both your own as a player and your statistics. You maybe have a new loadout. But to me, it brought back memories of redoing the same exact boss run over and over in a Souls game, either because it was the only zone I had left, or through pure obstinance. Smashing my head into the same boss, trying to learn their moveset better and come out victorious. Except this time, there was no possibility of thinking, well, maybe it's not me, maybe I'm under-leveled. That isn't a possibility. It was either my lack of skill or my failure to solve or even engage with the mech construction puzzle that had been put in front of me. That's what it can feel like at times. You reach a boss, you study it, understand that you should fly more to avoid attacks, or maybe equip a shield, or you just need to be faster, and then you customize a mech to fit that. This isn't always the case. With enough skill piloting your mech, you can make up for many shortcomings with raw ability. This is the closest I've ever felt to living out an anime plotline in real life. Moments where I knew my build wasn't optimal, but I knew in the heat of the epic soundtrack and radio chatter that I could pull through because I was the superior pilot. Other times, I felt like a genius walking in with a mech that could run circles around my opponent without them ever touching me. And these were things afforded to me by the pitch-perfect gameplay systems in Armored Core. There can always be hiccups, and some melee weapons I felt had inconsistent behavior, but more so than any other game from Software, the combat systems in place here are simply exquisite. This is a game where locking onto enemies is a mechanic that can be modified with parts. Everything is very technical and laid out to you as the player, with the same deliberate pacing you've come to expect from their other games, but taken to 11. It's faster, meaner, it hits harder, and sometimes feels sloppier due to that. But underneath, it's technically exact and precise. Given the absence of those other elements that people might expect, Armored Core delivers in what it sets out to do with its more limited scope. These missions and boss battles are playgrounds for you to design your mech and experience exhilarating combat that is finely tuned. If you've ever speedrun a Souls game or done a second run, excited at how a certain encounter would fare with a different build, you will love this game, because it is that perfect execution and that curiosity of playing around that feel the most alive on Rubicon. Now bear with me, because I'm about to say the corniest thing I've ever said and maybe will say. The biggest praise I can give the game is how it made me feel like a pilot, connected to my mech. As I fine-tuned every aspect of it, from the perfect weight balance to the rate at which energy refreshes and how much vertical boost I had, you begin to get a feel for your mech. Much like you would in other FromSoft games, you understand the precise rhythm of your attacks compared to your stamina regeneration, knowing how much you could dodge an attack before needing to regain it. In this game, that's taken to a whole new level. To continue with the analogy, you can easily change how much stamina you have, the delay before it begins to recover, the delay before it recovers if it's been fully depleted, how quickly it recovers, the distance that you dodge at, the acceleration and speed of your dodge, how much you jump, as well as how fast you sprint. I think this analogy works. There are, of course, many differences. There are no invincibility frames in Armored Core's dodges. The sprint is technically a boost dash. But fundamentally, it feels very similar, just more. It's not only getting a feel for all of those variables, but also the cooldown on your weapons, or the number of shots before reloading or overheating, and how they interact with the lock-on targeting system you've equipped. Once all of those things click, you transition from somebody looking at this user interface that is absolutely covered in information of all types, fumbling to understand things and struggling to remember, oh right, I should be using all 4 of my weapons. And once you get into that groove, you feel like you and your mech are truly on the same page. It's a satisfaction I felt many times with character action games, but those are often much more complex in their inputs, where AC6 is concerned about rhythm. The simplicity in the controls and how perfectly they fit mech control, with each weapon on one of the 4 shoulder buttons, a button to dash, a button to jump, and the sticks for movement and aim. That feeling of full control of your character here is much more easily attainable than, for example, in Ninja Gaiden Black. When you pair all of that with the fantasy the game presents you, that of being an AC pilot, these absolutely intimidating pieces of technology, but ones where the pilot himself has tremendous impact on their potential, you really connect to the path of improvement the game sets you on. And that is one of the most impressive parts of the game for me. Its story and setting really clicked. This is a straightforward affair, with plenty of tropes from sci-fi and especially other mech-based stories, but it was entertaining nonetheless. Most of it is shown through your mission briefings, static panels with names of those speaking. But as someone who loves visual novels and grew up on the Metal Gear Solid franchise, this doesn't detract from the game for me, even if I would have enjoyed some more cutscenes. Instead, I do appreciate that some of the most spectacular moments are done during gameplay. Moments I won't spoil here, but there are moments that include counting up numbers and locations exploding and last-second escapes that were amazing to not only witness, but to actually play through. But as much as this is straightforward and spectacular, I was surprised by just how much information about the setting and the history can be gained from the limited amount of exposition. With very few things being outright explained, you understand the backstory and history of this world in a very intuitive way, and grow to care for many of its characters just through their voices or mechs. For how little some of them are featured, both in the story or as brief combats in the arena, I still remember many names and even specific lines they say. This isn't a space opera. It doesn't fit, and it didn't have to be one, but what they did do is enjoyable, and a step I would consider one rung above the Netflix action thriller movie of the season. We know it's dumb, it's not winning any Oscars or getting 3-hour documentaries from Vodividya, but at least here you will remember the names of the characters and maybe even care for what happens to them instead of saying the Ryan Reynolds guy or the Gal Gadot character. But let me get back to that path of improvement. It's a journey that will take you maybe half of the game. Once the options open up and the pieces click in your head and you tune your mech, the game is over. Not literally, but you'll have found your groove and you probably won't move much unless you want to experiment. You might switch out some weapons for boss fights, but the core of your mech will probably stay the same. Same weight and stamina, speed and boost and lock on, and you'll have understood what the game wants or what are some of the more overpowered combos, since there are definitely weapons that are better than others. Certain weapons will do a specific job very well for certain encounters, and people optimizing for S ranks on all missions or looking to speedrun might take advantage of that. But most of us will discover that 2 shotguns or 2 Gatling guns will destroy almost everything and just cruise through the game, becoming one with the controls until our brains turn off and we glide through each mission, bringing total destruction to every opponent. And this experience is magnificent. Just the right kind of comfort food. High quality retro action refined to a shine. I don't know if I would prefer the game to have better weapon balance or a progression with constantly better gear and more difficult enemies tuned differently, or an even larger amount of mission variety to force me into retuning my mech. Or maybe I'm just happy reaching that point and then having fun, even if slowly the excitement tapers off. The lack of depth compared to an Elden Ring or a Dark Souls or any of those games makes the overall enjoyment fall, but only compared to potential expectations regarding them. Taking the game for what it is, it does few things, but it does them all fantastically. I left with a feeling that all of that was fun, but not profound or world-changing. Maybe it was lacking content compared to other games offered at the full retail price, but then I realized I had put 30 hours in, and a large portion I had a huge smile on my face. It's light on content and impact compared to the best games ever, and many of them just happen to be made by From Software. But this is leagues above many others, and if you understand what you're getting into, you will love it and get your money's worth. And then we can all dream of some of the refinements made here to combat being present in From Software's next big release, and cry because we have to wait for it. Until that day comes, I'm happy with my purchase, and I suspect many people who initially have no interest will be as well. And of course, I'm very much looking forward to the Maxor video on this. I am Muckthief. I do reviews, tutorials, guides, and I cover the news about gaming. If you enjoyed this review, please hit the like button and leave a comment. It helps it reach more people in the YouTube algorithm. If you have any criticism or feedback to offer, please leave it as well. I always want to improve and make my videos better. This is a never-ending journey, and if you want to accompany me on it, hit subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the internet.